Welcome to CISO's Insiders Podcast, powered by GRC Consulting. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing leading CISOs and security leaders in the industry for light, eye-level conversations. Here, they share advice and tips, talk about their biggest accomplishments and failures, favorite drinks, key influencers, and much more. We encourage you to walk away with at least one insight that will help you better yourself or your business. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more content, please check us out on social media.
Today, I'll be speaking to Cesar Quebral. I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly. Cesar is actually the CISO and head of IT infrastructure over Genesis Capital. Genesis Capital is one of the leading loan providers for the nation's top professional developers of residential, multifamily, and mixed use of real estate. The diversified product that Genesis Capital offers provide a line and sharp, swift execution that enables you to cater to a broad range of investors and developers. And I know that before you held this role, you were the SVP of Community Bank. Prior to that, you spent, I think, 8 years as a VP, Senior System Manager of Union Bank. And prior to that, you held a few consultant and engineering positions. And I would be more than happy if you could jump in and introduce yourself.
Great, Ben. Thanks. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. Yeah, I currently hold the CISO position at Genesis Capital. That was a recent promotion. I started as the head of infrastructure and also information security engineer when I started. Prior to that, I was mostly focused on infrastructure, data center, as well as cloud infrastructure support, a little bit of data warehouse and data engineering work as well. Right now at Genesis Capital, we're a subsidiary of Goldman Sachs, and although I report to the executive committee at Genesis Capital, I do hold a monthly meeting with my constituents at Goldman Sachs to talk about current security updates and status, and talk about projects and how we're doing as far as security postures, if we have any incidents or events that we need to report, as well as I walk through security dashboards to talk about our performance, a bunch of KPIs to see how we're achieving our goals in InfoSec.
Okay, thank you for that. And yeah, I wasn't aware that it was a subsidiary of Goldman Sachs. I'm assuming so that you might have some experience then with a decentralized approach for information security, which could be, I presume, could be more challenging than a centralized approach. But yeah, maybe we could learn a bit about that going forward in this discussion. Great. So I always like to start with a couple of icebreaker questions here. If you're willing to share about your marital status and favorite drink, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I've been married married for 27 years now. I met my wife back in college, and we just recently celebrated our 27th. So happily married. We have three
Nice.
boys together. Yeah, most of them, actually all of them are. 2 of them are in college. One is already working in the technology field, and she's a nurse for 25 years now. So,
Wow.
yeah. And so you can imagine, given the current situation with COVID, that was a tough situation to manage, but she's a veteran, and she's doing well. And my favorite drink is a tequila. I'm a tequila drinker.
Really?
Although, just to be transparent, the last drink I had was back in Thanksgiving in 2020. I have not had a drink since then.
Wow. That's like what, 5 months then from now?
Yeah, Yeah, and I'm just an occasional drinker. I don't drink all the time, and given my age, I'm just trying to be more careful and trying to limit what my body takes in.
Yeah, you try to limit your intake of alcohol.
Yeah, yeah,
Got it.
and red meat and whatever else is not good for 50-year-olds out there.
Yeah, tell me about it. Well, I think that's a totally separate discussion. I changed my diet tremendously for probably 12 months ago, so I can relate to that. Although I do love red meat, but I do try to limit the quantities that I intake.
Right.
Great. So let's dive right in. So I always like to learn more about the individual I'm speaking to, and I try to understand more about the career path. And if there's one thing that you wish you had known about your career before you began it, what would that be?
Yeah, good question. Before beginning my career, I wish I'd known that it's really important to work in different industries and not get locked in one industry, like financial or banking or investment for that matter. I mean, it's a good industry to be in. However, if you want to diversify and broaden your skill set, I think it's good for people to get exposed in different industries. I mean, technology, info security adds value to any industries out there. However, it's also good to know about the business processes, business operations, and the different strategies and different type of businesses, so that you're more diverse. You know about the technology, you know about the solutions that supports it, and then um, and the type of info security risks and their postures that you'd be familiar with. For example, being in the banking and investment industry for 20, 25 years, I have no background in healthcare. It'll be good to know what type of controls and policies you need to put in place for healthcare and HIPAA and those type of regulations that you need to work with, or even manufacturing. There's huge manufacturing opportunities out there. It's good to know the type of applications and business processes that you need to support from an infrastructure standpoint and infosec standpoint. And I wish that I diversified a little bit early on in my career, but I have no regrets. It's good to be in this environment.
Yeah, and you know what, that's a great answer. But let me just chime in here. So working in a consulting capacity for probably the last 21 years, I can totally understand what you're talking about. And I think it's more than just understanding the business and the business processes for a specific industry. I think it's it's more than that. It's like to learn more about the ecosystem itself. So anything from like vendors, supply chain, what's at the core in terms of data? Do you handle, with PII, financial information, PHI, and as you mentioned, you have various aspects to consider, starting, in compliance, laws and regulations, vendor management, and so on. So personally, I do agree with that sentiment, and I think that's one of the, I would say, one of the, what's the word I'm looking for? One of the benefits of being a consultant is that you're exposed to all those industries. You have the ability to tap in and actually learn about those.
Right, right. Yeah, I feel like you're at a disadvantage if you're stuck in one particular industry, because that's what people are looking at when they're looking at your expertise, whether it's a job opportunity or a consulting engagement. They're looking at your portfolio and say, this individual has worked in the financial industry. He can't possibly come in and provide value in healthcare or manufacturing or technology.
Yeah.
Interesting story, transitioning from community bank to Genesis Capital. I was looking at different industries because I wanted to have a different perspective. I wanted to change. And you go to robotics, you go to healthcare, you go to manufacturing, even tech. Felt like I didn't get a chance at all because that's been my background for the past 20 years. And then there's this misconception about working for a bank. it's slow, it's bureaucratic, and there's a lot of policies and procedures that don't necessarily fit a small tech startup, for example. So those are the kind of things that you would face later on in your career.
Yeah, yeah, and you only learn about it like as time goes by, and this is when you understand that
Right.
if you've done something differently.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. So moving on to the next question, what would you say your biggest failure was, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, very good question. If I have to say, I have to pick one, I would say when my wife and when I helped her establish a radiology business and transcription. And I think that if I have to say the biggest failure would be that. It was a challenging situation because it was the first business that she started, and we didn't know about how to start a business, how to finance it. But I thought we had a great idea when she first thought of the business. She wanted to help a small hospital in the suburbs that did not have any radiologists in-house, but they have a huge community. And what was happening was, they would send anyone who's had injuries like broken bones or sprains or any chest pains to another hospital that about 3-4 hours away for radiologists to look at them. And the pitch was easy, and it was basic. We would go in and we would provide the equipment, the infrastructure. In return, we'll provide the radiology services as well as the transcription services and the coding services. And we did the financials, and it looked really good. There's enough patients based on the historical numbers that we were getting from the hospital, and we were taking on the risk. Basically, me and my wife decided to use our funds to pay for the equipment. And for the first few months, everything was going well, and they didn't realize that hospitals can file for bankruptcy restructuring, basically locking up the investments that we've made. And we had to continue with our operations because we had little clinics that we were providing services to. And at that time, we can't just stop our services. We can't just tell our radiologists that, we're not doing the service anymore because it's going to affect the other customers that we had. Long story short, we ended up coming up with the funds to be able to continue operating with the rest of the clinics while the hospital stopped paying us for the services, and ended up getting the equipment back and selling it for pennies to the dollar.
Okay, that's definitely an uncommon story, I think. But do you feel you learned something from it that helped you along the way then?
I did, yeah. Well, probably the biggest lesson learned is not to take on the risk yourself, right? So if you believe in the numbers, you have the financials, typically you would seed the business and start it at what you're comfortable with, not betting the farm, so to speak. And then if you truly believe that there is the 2-3 year financial model that you're going to be getting revenues, then you would probably get fundings from like investors, angel investors, or other debtors, and talk about Series A and B. But that's one thing I learned. If I decide to start another business in the future, I'd go through the common funding process.
Yeah. And in other words, I think, someone smarter than me had said, fail small, fail fast, or fail fast, fail small. And,
Right.
and owning a business and operating a few businesses, I can tell you that I've lost a bunch, but I've always tried to, to limit those losses. And, coming from the risk management industry, I'm sure that, if you'd done that today, you might have done you might have done it a bit differently. But in any case, I think as you mentioned, like every failure is a growth for opportunity as well.
Right.
Yeah, we just need to try and make those as harmless and as painless as possible, right?
Exactly. Right.
Okay, okay. So touching on your biggest failure, what would you say your biggest accomplishment was?
Yeah, that would have to be one of my proudest moments is to having achieved my master's at Claremont Graduate University back in 2014. It's a big deal because I'm the very first one in my family to have achieved a master's in the U.S. So
Oh.
for me, that was a very, very important milestone.
So
Yeah.
that was like a badge of honor for you.
Well, for me, and also, it's important because I like to show the family, right, and be like a role model to my kids, to my nephews and nieces, and my cousins. So it's a proud moment. I represented the family that day when I received my diploma.
Nice. I actually, I was also the first one in my family to achieve a bachelor degree. I didn't go all the way to MBA back then, but I was like the first one to graduate out of college. And I think both of us we come from, I wouldn't say similar backgrounds, but I think both of our families have migrated from one country to another,
Hmm.
and I think that maybe goes back to the reason. Because for example, like my father and my mother, they didn't graduate, they didn't go to college or universities, and I'm assuming based on what you just said that it's a similar story with you. And my dad, he moved to Israel when he was a teenager, and I think you also mentioned that you moved to the US as a teenager.
Yeah,
That's
I
correct.
was 14 when I migrated here.
Okay, got it. So
Yeah,
yeah, I can
and
definitely, I understand
it's
this.
not an easy age to to start
No.
a new life, but I can only imagine, actually not just imagine, I saw how my parents had to adjust culturally when we moved here in 1986. It's quite a while now, but yeah, it was very much, you've read the stories of early immigrants when they came here and the challenges that they had to face not knowing the system. There's culture shock, and we felt that it was it was a challenging situation. But hindsight 2020, if we would have stayed, it would have been a more difficult situation because lack of opportunity and financial troubles and all that comes coming from a third world country. Those are the things that you face. That's why I'm very happy that my parents persevered and brought us here.
Yeah. And I don't know your story, but I can only imagine they did it for you, for the kids. So, so they were willing to take the hardship in order for you to have a better life. I'm
Right.
just assuming here, but it's not that a stretch.
Yeah, that's you're right on there.
Okay. So if there is one advice you could give out to someone who's wanting to pursue a career similar to yours, what would that be?
It's a good question. I would say establishing a relationship with a mentor, seeking a mentor, and it isn't going out there and say, "Hey, can I ask you to be my mentor?" Right? I feel like a mentor-mentee relationship is something that happens naturally, and it happens progressively, right? You see people with experience out there. Look for people that you look up to, listen to them. If they have a podcast or they go through, and they speak at conventions, or they even if they don't speak, you maybe have a cup of coffee with them and just try to establish that relationship. I think it's really important to have a mentor early on in your career. As speaking of mentorship, it isn't a one-way street. What I learned is it's really important for you to give something back, reciprocate, and that could be as easily as showing potential and learning from the conversations that you're having with your mentor, right? It isn't just asking questions and getting their feedback and running away and not establishing a relationship. I think it's important to have that relationship long term, not just short term. So showing them that there's value and some of the things that you're learning from them and that they're providing you, and executing on those and providing feedback on what works and what doesn't work. I think those are key when it comes to mentor-mentee relationships.
And based on your answer, I imagine you had a mentor. Did you want to mention some of those, or was it a specific individual, a few of those?
There's a couple of individuals that I've worked with, and I'm very thankful to have worked with them. There's a gentleman from Union Bank that taught me to look at things as a big picture. Don't look at it myopically. At that time, I did not understand what he meant by not looking at it myopically until later on in my career. But Bill Christensen really told me that, look, if you're looking at a particular problem, you got to step back and take a look at the big picture and look at the whole profile from a risk standpoint, from profit standpoint, who's affected, and what is it really doing? And then you can come up with various solutions depending, you can pick the appropriate solution for the problem based on, your assertion from other people, right? You got to talk to people and don't look at it on your own with your own eyes. So it's really important that I learned that from Bill early on, because I continue to apply that as part of my philosophy when it comes to looking at problems. I'd like to, if there is somebody that I looked up to growing early on in my career, would be Bill Christensen. And then same timeline, when I was at Union Bank, there was a gentleman that helped me. He actually placed me at Union Bank as a senior database administrator. His name was Mark Jennings, who's no longer with us. He passed away a while back, but he was a mentor naturally. He didn't just leave me alone. He continued to touch bases with me. He wanted to hear how things were going, and I shared some of the projects that we did at Union Bank, and he continued to provide guidance, and he was very supportive. He wrote my letters of recommendations at Claremont, and before going to Claremont, he wrote my letter. And Mark was the type of person. He was someone that I couldn't call at any time. I'd be on the road. I remember my commute was about an hour and a half to 2 hours at times. And when I'm thinking of ideas, whether it's entrepreneurship or challenges at work or a new product, for example, that I want to talk to product managers at Union Bank or a Western Asset, he was there. He would listen to me and he would provide guidance, and he would tell me, he would provide me his advice. And sometimes when he doesn't have any, he would tell me or refer me to somebody that may know. So he's been very very helpful. But those two gentlemen are great, but also my wife. My wife's been around and supported me for many years. I always tell my team that have a strong relationship with your family, because you're going to have tough days in the office. You're going to have tough days outside the house, and the last thing you want is a unstructured home front, right? It's really important to have a strong relationship with your wife and your kids, because at the end of the day, when you come home, you want to look forward to coming home, right? You want to go home to a warm home, to a good, to a wife with a good relationship with. So it's really important. I mean, I share this story all the time. I had a tough day in the office, and I was stuck on the 5 North, and I was thinking about the problem, and it was really a tough day for me. It was a project that was worth millions, and I picked up the phone and I called my wife and I just told her how tough my day was. And the last thing, all I needed was a validation that I can come home and she'll take care of me. And all she said was, look, come home, I have dinner, and we'll talk. And that was really good. That was helpful, and it's been consistent that way. So I just wanted to share that those are the three people that I really look up to.
Okay, sounds like your wife is a healer.
Yeah. Well, she's a nurse, so yeah, it comes with the role.
Yeah, but I also meant mentally, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You know, just like a sharp detour here, like a completely different question I wanted to ask before. But you know, I've noticed that you're both the CISO and the, what was that, VP of IT, I think.
Yeah.
So what would you say about the tension between, you know, those two roles? Like, what do you feel about the role of a CISO that's actually a part of IT? And in your case, I think it might be even more complex, right?
Yeah, it is complex, but I think it's, we've thought about this, right? I mean, whether a CISO role belongs in technology, but I think the value there is cohesiveness and integration. I feel like there's also this trust that you establish because there's a respect between technology and information security, at least in my role, because I have that background. I have 20 years of infrastructure background, and so when I talk to my team in infrastructure about a potential risk or controls that we want to implement, it isn't something that I know the impact of the infrastructure, but I don't assume things. But having them understand that I have a background in infrastructure helps tremendously when we come to the table and we talk about projects and why we're doing it. And another philosophy of mine is we talk about the whys. I don't just go to infrastructure and say we've identified potential risks near term and long term, and therefore we got to do this, right? I take pride in myself in sitting down and explaining the whys and talking to the counterparties and my team and what's the importance of what we're trying to accomplish. And then I try to paint the picture, stepping back in the big picture again, talking about what this is doing, what this will accomplish, and why this benefits the firm, and how it aligns with the overall priorities that we look at.
Okay, that's an interesting response, but let me ask you a follow-up question on this. So,
Sure.
don't you ever feel that you're in a place where you need to choose between like what's like production requirements, what's good for the company, and then as opposed to what? No, let me rephrase. Don't you ever feel that you're in a place where you need to choose between IT and delivery and information security or compliance?
I think it's both. Understanding that what we act on is on the control side. We got to be able to mitigate the risk that could affect the business in operating and delivering the services that we deliver to our customers. But at the same time, understanding that we have a business to run, right? We exist because of the performance of the business, kind of allows me to tailor a solution that still mitigates the risk without affecting business as usual. I guess my position is that having a technical and infosec background and majoring in business management, business administration, and having an MBA kind of gives me an edge in my role because I can talk financials, right? I can talk to the CFO and talk to them about potential costs, expenses that come with the solution. At the same time, understand the impact of the expenses to the overall revenue, right? And then you kind of tailor a solution that fits the business. And as you know, revenue is ebb and flows, and there's fluctuations, and you have to establish priorities, immediate, something that we need to implement now because of the risk profile, or something long term, so that you can align it with the business climate, right? For example, when COVID came around, right, and my role was we need to continue protecting our users even if they're working remote. But at the same time, I recognize that we are going to take tremendous hit from the cash flows because of COVID, and therefore working with the CIO, working with the executive committee members, and working with chief financial officers about what are potential risks that we're going to be facing, and what can we work with, and what's the absolute minimum baseline from a security standpoint we need to work with, so that we can allow our users to continue to work from home, so that we can service our business.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So yeah, I think I got that. So what you're saying, in other words, is that, having background both in IT, DevOps, and even application security, and IT and compliance, so that puts you in a better place to make those decisions, and while taking into account like all aspects, to include even financial.
Yeah. It comes with, at the end of the day, it's business strategy, right? Looking at the whole looking at the situation as a whole, and taking a look at what are we trying to accomplish, what is the risk profile, and what do we have, what are some of the solutions afforded to us. And it doesn't happen when COVID hit, for example, going back to that timeline. It happens way ahead of that. In my role, we have a responsibility to think about these potential situations, whether it's disaster recovery, pandemic, or any disasters that could affect the business that's outside of your control. And therefore, you have to come up with a type of solution that meets the business, right? Depending on the size of the business. In this particular example, just to be more specific, enable for us to operate in a tight revenue based on a pandemic or other disaster, you need to be able to leverage third-party vendors to provide support, because third-party vendors can scale and downsize depending on what you guys are willing to pay for, versus looking at capital expenditure by bringing in additional resources that has a long-term impact, right? And not just financially, it has long-term impact to the individuals. If the need, there's a time and place where you got to cut people. In the vendor space, it's easier to work with, right? You can say, right now, because of COVID, we need to leverage resources, but this is what we need, and this is what we can afford, and this is what we can, with the risk profile that we can take on. Therefore, let's work together, versus going out there and hiring people to be able to support your needs in short notice in this climate is really difficult in the tech space, because there's not a lot of people available out there. So vendor partnership is critical.
Correct. And that might actually, be in correlation to my next question, because I know you've mentioned vendors and, the MBA and the mentors, but I always like to ask about the best resources that have helped you along the way in your career path, I mean.
Yeah, the best resources, actually, the vendors that I like working with are the ones that are proactive in talking about short-term, long-term business needs, right? Because I always look at us as a small fish in a big pond, right? There are other fishes out there, and a lot of these vendors work with others and learn about their challenges based on business challenges and what were the solutions. So I've always partnered with vendors that are listening and looking at the other industry and similarities, and see what helped those industry, those companies that could help us, right? Because we don't see that, right? We can look at Gartner and take a look at, the real estate market, for example, and what are some of the challenges, the technical challenges that we should be looking at. But I have a day-to-day operations that we work with that I need to prioritize the business and my constituents. Vendors bring that added value. If I can meet with them on a quarterly basis to talk about what are some of our challenges, where's the business going, what's not working, and what's working, so that the next iterations of those meetings, they can come back and say, yeah, XYZ company is experiencing the same thing, or they don't have to share the exact problem, but they can come back and say, I think this could be of value you might want to look at. And then I'm willing to listen, because it's something that they came up with based on some of the feedback that I provided.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I would just add to that that I personally feel that a community also helps, but that's just my opinion. Is there any one common myth about your profession or field that you wanted to debunk?
Um, I have to say that you can't just be technical if you're in technology. I think it is important that you understand the business that you're involved with. I think it's important for you to be out there and talking to your constituents, understanding some of their challenges, not just challenges from a business standpoint, but some of the challenges with some of the technology that you put in place, some of the security controls that you put in place, because it may work for you because you're not part of the business process. You're not part of operations. You're not communicating with the customers. But how do you really know that it's meeting business expectations or it's helping the business to be competitive? I've always looked at technology as a competitive advantage for businesses out there. Only if the head of technology or the info security officer is meeting with their constituents on a regular basis to talk about how's it going, how's the phishing out there. I mean, when you VPN in, what are some of the challenges that you experience? Is multi-factor authentication working? Can we enhance the process better? There was a recent situation where they wanted to be able to share files externally, and we need to come up with a solution that meets that business need. And even though we have a current technology, apparently it doesn't work, or they were not aware of it. So I take it upon myself to make sure that either myself or someone from my team communicates it so that we can show them that we have the solution, and that's critical in providing value to the business. So yeah, I guess the common myth is you can't just be good at application development, infrastructure management, troubleshooting, infosec. You can be the best at being able to track down malware and mitigate the risk. But if you don't understand the business in which you're operating, you're not going to succeed, or someone else will. Someone else who's savvy and wants to learn more about the business will add more value to the business.
Yeah, and speaking about challenges, what would you say the main challenges nowadays that occupy most CISOs? Is this around like the supply chain, or is it around anything else in your opinion?
The constant threat. I think more and more, if you listen to the news, that it seems that the frequency and the gravity of a cybersecurity incident is huge, and it isn't just affecting businesses; it affects the customers and the reputational risk. But we've known that, right? But the challenge in my role is, even though you're coming in and you're adding value, and that you're protecting the firm, and there's no incident and there's no event because of the controls that you put in place, it's hard to share the value of infosec. It's hard to be able to justify some of the costs that we're paying for because we've not had any incidents. But you don't want it to get to that point, right? You want to make sure that you're able to communicate the value and show them that it's worth the investment, and that you're mitigating the risks, and therefore we've not had any incidents. So that's the biggest challenge. And I've spoken to a few of my peers, and that seemed to be a common theme, is especially in a tight marketplace, justifying some of the costs necessary to protect the firm has been very difficult.
Mm-hmm. And I know you've mentioned in our previous talk about dealing with the Eisenhower Matrix. If I remember correctly, that's urgent versus important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
So you're, if I understand correctly, you're trying to be more focused on on what's important, and by dealing with those items, thus reducing the urgent matters as time goes by. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's just my philosophy when it comes to time management, right? Putting together an Eisenhower matrix. Basically, the top left quadrant is your urgent, most important, and then the top right is your important but not urgent.
Not urgent, yeah.
And then the bottom two quartile, bottom left, is your urgent but not important. It's someone's urgency, but it's important for you to work with those individuals. And then the bottom right quartile are things that I think about doing in the future. It's not urgent, it's not important, but it's something that it's in the back of mind, something that's going to come, whether near, in the near future or long term.
Yeah.
And it helps. I have that on a weekly basis. It shows what I've accomplished. It's easy to be able to measure. In my role, there's nothing tangible at times that you can use to measure your success. But when you take a look at the Eisenhower Matrix, you can see that, hey, there are things that we've accomplished. And there's actually a lot in retrospect. So that helps validate some of the things that we've done and helps you steer the ship moving forward. And I focus on what's important, not just for you, but for your team.
And having touched a bit about your weekly routine, is there any daily routine you could share with us?
Yeah, a good story. When I was at Western Asset, my boss was a pilot. He had his own plane. He didn't co-own it, but he had a Cessna, and it's a small plane. But my first few months, he wanted to show off his plane, and I said, sure, I'll come join you. And I saw his plane, but it took a while for us to fly, and I was very eager. I was excited to fly, but he was looking at his notes and checking things off. And I finally asked him, what is that? And he said it's his pre-flight checklist. And it resonated, and I continue. Since that time, I've always put together what I call a pre-flight checklist. Every morning I have a routine that I follow before I start my day. I mean, I don't follow it every day, but I try my best. But I noticed that those days when I don't follow my pre-flight, I have a tougher time managing my day because I didn't get a chance. It almost serves like a meditation practice, because you're going through your normal routine. You have a cup of coffee, you're looking at your alerts, you're looking at your dashboards, you're looking at your tickets, and you're thinking of what's the strategy for the day and what didn't work yesterday. And so it's like it serves as a retrospective. You start thinking about what didn't work and what you need to improve upon as a person, both on a personal and professional level. And then you execute on those and you continue to learn. It's another misconception, right? You don't get to a point where you learn everything. It's a you continue to learn, right? It's a learning process. It's ever changing environment that you need to keep up.
Sure. And are you familiar with the book called The Miracle Morning? Because it speaks
No.
specifically about that daily routine. So,
no. What's the name of the book?
It's called The Miracle Morning by a guy named, I think his name is Hal Elrod. I think Hal Elrod. Yeah, Hal Elrod. Yeah, with an E.
I should check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks specifically about what you just described, so it's very interesting.
Yeah. I think it's really important to have a routine, and also, every weekend I know people say you need to take some time off and not think about work, but I think it's important to have a retrospective. And Saturday morning routine, having my cup of coffee, I always think about what I did that week and what worked and what didn't work. Again, thinking about what I shouldn't have done and what I should have done, and that prepares me for the next week as I come into work and be a better person and know what strategy to execute.
Yeah, I totally understand. For me, I have like the unwinding period around Friday afternoon, and then Sunday evening, I start going over in my head, like about, the week to come, and I start planning. So I understand that sentiment.
One last thing about the retrospective that I want to share is that it allows me to think about what my team did and what they accomplished. And I go back on conversations I had with my teams and my peers. And most of the time, I always remember the good things, right? I, at times I would text them. I would send them a message just saying, "Hey, great job. Um, just wanted you to know that I'm, happy about the results." Even the peer that may not who may not report to me, knowing that they're going through something, just sending a message saying, "Hey, look, I'm here. Let's tackle your issues next week. I'm going to be available. I'll spend some time. I'll carve out time in my calendar so that you and I can sit down and work on it." Those go a long way. And then it's reciprocity. The things that you get back, the commitment, the dedication from the team is tenfold, because they know that you appreciate it. They know that you're there, you recognize, and it doesn't just go by the wayside.
Yeah, it pays dividend. I understand.
Yep, right.
Anything you can share about trends around budget planning, like changes from previous years? Let's just, assume 2019, 2020 as opposed to 2021. Do you think, the budget planning would look different here?
I think, in my opinion only, right? And it's hard to use 2020 as a trend because of COVID, but if we take 2020 off the table and look at the 2018, 2019, there's this uptrend in investments, knowing the risk profile of the company and what we need to do in InfoSec. But there's also opportunities and efficiencies as far as data center to the cloud migration. I think that there's this misconception that cloud is expensive. There's a lot of opportunity to scale on the cloud. It's not static. You can increase and decrease your capacity. Therefore, it lends in from an expense management standpoint. It actually puts IT in a competitive edge because they're able to manage their budget better. But going back to your question, from a budgetary standpoint, I'm seeing it's not a, the trend is not high, right? The angle is not high, but there is some uptick in cybersecurity investment for sure.
Okay, great. And switching gears here, and just I want to speak a bit about vendors. If you can put yourself in the shoes of a vendor just for a moment, what's the one promise you make to yourself not to ever do?
That I would make the investment without thinking about the business value, right? That I will always make the best decision, and the decision that meets business needs. I always prioritize the business.
In other words, you wouldn't offer a service or a product that you don't feel would provide value to the customer?
Exactly. I mean, we don't go after the shining object, right? There has to be, and even if we go for it, there has to be statistics and data to support it. There's this best of breed products out there, but you also have to be mindful of where the company is and the size of the company. I can look at Cisco, for example, and I've supported Cisco for many, many years. But if you're working for a small organization, it may not fit the financial models, right? And Cisco is more complex, right? It's advanced. It's more complex. Therefore, you may require the certain resource that hold certifications in Cisco to be able to support that environment. And I may get lucky. I might find that resource, I may not. So it really depends on what the business is doing, the risk profile, the revenue expectations, and the market in which they're operating before I make a decision on the type of technologies and vendors we work with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it goes back to other answers I've gotten from your peers. Basically, I think almost everyone told me the same thing, that vendors need to do their research before they cold call you. And
Right.
then, yeah, and then
And they need to have worked in that specific industry as well. That's the challenge, right?
yeah,
Because vendors are and I recognize the situation, right? Their position. They're expected to meet certain quotas, right? And they, they cast a wide net, and maybe that works for mid-tier Fortune 500 companies, but for a smaller company like Genesis Capital, that doesn't work, because we need to be very mindful of what we're trying to accomplish, and we need to make sure that it's in line with business growth and strategy.
sure. And touching a bit about vendors, can you share maybe a story about the most annoying sales pitch that you've encountered?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's great to work with vendors. They always have a lot to share when I have the time. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to sit there and talk about the products and the services that they offer. And I truly believe that we're in an industry where there's a lot of vendors that offer a lot of value that we could benefit from. But there are times where vendors would call me and say, yeah, so and so referred me to you and told me that you should look into our services. And then you dig deeper, you find out that they weren't really referred. They do their due diligence and they go to LinkedIn and recognize that I'm connected to so and so, and therefore using that name. They certainly can do that, but I just don't. I want them to talk about the company, the product and services. And let's focus on that, and we don't need to, name drop or use somebody else's name just to get your foot in the door. That's my biggest pet peeve, because I certainly wouldn't want my name thrown out there and say, yeah, Cesar said to give you a call because you worked with them and you should listen to our pitch. And I wouldn't do that, right? I mean, I would have done that before, but I would have a courtesy call first and let the individual, my peer, know that, hey, I think that Ben, you should talk to Ben. I'll do a warm introduction and then I'll walk away. But that's how I conduct business, because it's a trust, right? It's all about trust. It has to be built on trust.
Especially in this space, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So now that we've established what is it that you're, not too enthused about with vendors, what is it that you are looking for in a vendor? I can only assume, but I'd like to hear it from you.
Yeah, I'd like to work with vendors that I mentioned this earlier. I want them to listen. I want them to do their own research about our company and our situation and our products. And if they do fit our needs, I'd prefer to work with vendors that have their own internal resources, because we deal with a lot of financial transactions in PII, and we want to make sure that that's one last thing that I worry about. I want to make sure that the vendor I'm working with have resources internally, that if they establish a subcontract or if they sub the work to someone else, that I can be, I don't have to worry about who has access to our data and who doesn't. We go through our vendor due diligence, and we onboard vendor based on the type of data that they will have access to and the type of services that they provide. Therefore, it's easier to manage when you're working with vendors with a deep resource and they have the expertise in that space.
Okay. And so what would you say, is there any tip you could provide on how vendors can connect to you online in a non-intrusive manner then?
Emails work. Cold calls work. I mean, I don't normally answer my phones, but once in a while I do. But emails do work, right? Effective pitch is really important. I mean, that's not going to go away. I think that's the number one way of reaching to us. Maybe holding virtual webinars to talk about particular challenges out there in the industry and what vendors are doing, and then inviting CISOs like me to attend and hear about, I agree, I have those challenges, and it's good to hear that there's a subject matter expert from that vendor who's representing that company, and I'd love to talk to them about it further. I think that's one thing that I've seen to be effective for me, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Is there any CISOs out there that you look up to that you wanted to share?
Yeah, that's easy. I mean, I don't know a lot of CISOs out there, but there's one person that I look up to. His name is Phil Venables. He's the uh, previous CISO at uh, Goldman Sachs. Very much been a very supportive in um, my role as a CISO at Genesis Capital. He's no longer with Goldman Sachs, but yeah, he's been great to work with. He's very active on LinkedIn, and he and I uh, still connect. And it's good to be able to work with him on specific issues that we're facing with.
Good, good. Thank you for that. And yeah, I might be able to link you up with a team of peers of CISOs if you'd be if you'd be interested in.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Great. So, is there any one place where our listeners can connect with you online?
LinkedIn is the best way to connect with me. Again, I'm not very active, but depending on again how you connect, it has to make sense, right? The connection has to make sense. You can imagine how many connections I get. A lot of vendors connect with me about their services. I would say the success rate there is about 1 out of 10, right? It really depends. I don't just like connections for no reason. It has to make sense.
Yeah. I found out that for the past probably year or so, I get like at least 5 to 8 connection requests a day from companies that want to do our lead gen and cold calling. And I'm just wondering if they're so successful, how come we're not? I'm not approving any of those because it just it's the same tune time and time again. But yeah, I understand your sentiment.
Yeah.
What's the single most important thing in your career? Sorry, I was stuck there.
I have to say the people, the team,
The people.
the people in my team. I would not have accomplished a lot of the successes in my role. I would not be here if it weren't for the teams that supported me. I mean, the unsung heroes. Um, I uh, I always thank them, and if I have an opportunity to get them in front of our executives, I do, because they are a very important part of my career. And I've been blessed to have worked with great people in the past, great mentors, great bosses and peers. And I have to say that people are your most important asset. And second to that is trust. It's trust from those people. Those people, they need to be able to trust you, and so you need to be able to deliver what's expected, and don't commit unless you know that you can accomplish it. So yeah, the people, and I love my team, and it's been great, and I'm blessed.
Okay, great. And a couple quick questions before we wrap this up. I know it's getting getting pretty late in the afternoon now.
Sure.
If you had unlimited funds, what would you do with your life?
I travel the world with my wife. That's my passion. I love learning about other cultures. I want to educate myself about the culture. I want to learn about the food, the people, the the language, and just appreciate, you know, what um, what that place offers. And it's not just a short 1 week stint here and there. I want to be able to immerse myself and learn about people, and meet people and learn about their culture. That's what I would do if I had unlimited funds, and then give back to the community. I would, especially places where, in our local community, and giving back to them, and and finally probably kick off the Giving Wall, which is an organization that I've been thinking about starting, and I'd love to start that in the future.
And what was that called? The Giving Wall?
Yeah, the Giving Wall. I came up with that name because I read a book about college students having this wall in their university, and they would leave books and jackets that they no longer need, that they've read for other students. It's like a community, and that's what I want to do with the giving wall. If you look at your closet, your jacket closet, you probably have yourself. You probably have, not to judge you, but a lot of people probably have jackets that they haven't used for years, and it's been sitting there. And I can tell you, with our homeless problem out there, they can use that jacket that you no longer need, or someone on the other side of the world can use it, but you have it, and it's just sitting there collecting dust, and it's taking space in your house. You have books that you've read that you've gained knowledge from that you no longer need, that you don't need as a reference, that you can impart to somebody that's getting into the industry who could use that book. And others that look around you. If you be mindful, you'll notice that you have things in your closet, in your cabinet, in your drawer, in your desk that you haven't touched, if not months, years, that someone else could probably could use because they need it. So that's kind of the aspect. That's kind of the idea of the giving wall, is how do we give it to the less fortunate people, right?
Mm-hmm. And that, so in what way would that be different from, let's say, goodwill?
It's so the giving wall will establish a framework by which people can do it easily. If I ask you right now, what would you do to be able to give to the goodwill? Maybe but the majority of the people don't know the process, right? For me, what is ubiquitous? It's your phone, and what you can do with that phone is tremendous. You can take a picture of the item, and you can reach someone in South Africa, for example, or a third world country that also, believe it or not, may have a phone and they can see it and they need it. And establishing a way for that item from your desk to actually make it in South Africa.
Okay.
And that's the problem we're trying to solve.
And
right?
that's a challenge, right? That's a challenge.
That is a challenge. It's going to be the infrastructure, the framework, the organizations that are willing to be part of it, like UPS, DHL, FedEx, and how do we do that on a consistent basis so that you have this belt that runs every day, that people
across
can
the globe.
Put it on that belt, and you can see it run across the globe and you don't even think about it, right? And vice versa. People that may not be less fortunate, but may see something that they can use from that giving wall, may want it, right? Not that they can't afford it, but they might see that somebody's giving it up, and I have a need for it. I'd like to have it. It could be a book like that you've been wanting to read, or it could be an item that somebody says we don't no longer need, but you have an immediate need for it. Again, you put it on that conveyor belt, and it just it's running.
Yeah, it gets to its destination.
This is what will empower that, which is the phone.
Yeah.
And I'm not familiar with, because I haven't really spent a lot of time. It's an idea, but I haven't spent a lot of time in how Goodwill works, or the Red Cross and others. But I feel like this is in addition to that, or it could be complementary. It could be the front end to those organizations.
Well, definitely hit me up when you want to talk more about this. It's interesting. I'm not sure how to solve that mobilizing piece there. That's the challenge, I think. But would love to be involved, even as a sounding board for that.
That'd be great.
Great.
Thanks for that, Ben.
One final question: have you read or listened to anything recently that has inspired you?
Yeah, the most recent book that really inspired me is "Let My People Go Surfing" by Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia. It talks about the story of Patagonia and how it started, and then it gets into the current business framework or business philosophy of making reliable products that are recyclable and being environmental friendly, and still still run a business, but socially responsible. You can have both.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily run a business and not think about giving back to the community in which you're operating. You can do both. And a good example is part of the sale of the product goes back to to the community.
Okay, I'll check this one out. Let my people go surf.
It's a good book. It's life-changing.
Okay, so that's by Yvonne, not sure how to pronounce it.
Chenard.
Chenard, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thanks, noted.
You're welcome.
Well, it was great chatting with you, Cesar. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining me in this episode of the podcast. Hopefully, some of your answers might resonate with some of the listeners here. I definitely learned a lot about you. And thank you again for taking the time, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, Ben. It's been my pleasure. Really appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Same.